Well, this is the week where we start to get rid of the departments in the federal government. The Department of Education has been at the top of the list for years. So how could dismantling the DOE impact America's youth? Matt Kibbe is the BlazeTV host of Kibbe on Liberty, and he believes that it's the best thing that could happen to them. And he joins us now. So, Matt, I look at the American education system when we know that we spend so much money on that, and yet the test scores get worse and worse every single year. So how has this dichotomy, how's this come together? We increase all of the spending, and yet the Department of Education just continues to get worse.
I know that you can actually look at the chart in the collapsing of educational quality and kids actually learning and the amount of money we spend on education. And you can trace that diversion to the creation of the Department of Education by Jimmy Carter. It is a slush fund for bureaucrats and their weird agendas. That money does not go to the classroom. It does not go to schools. It's just a gross bureaucracy that's actually sucking money away from the schools. And they're afraid that we're going to discover that.
Well, in comes the Trump administration, and we have an EO, we're going to executive order, going to go out and get the Department of Education, and people are freaking out about it. What say you?
It's a little too late for my taste. We should have done this many years ago. We shouldn't have started it in the first place. I love the fact that Trump is keeping his promise on this because he ran on it. And what he's also doing, and not just with education, but with a lot of these executive orders, he's pushing his Republican colleagues in the House and Senate to do something that they should do, probably don't want to do. There's plenty of rhinos. We got to beat the Republicans before we can beat the Democrats in Congress. But he is setting an agenda where they have to come in and pass Thomas Massie's legislation. They have to do it. Otherwise, the next Democratic administration just brings it all back. This happened in Trump 1 when Biden came back. So yes, great start. Gut it, expose the corruption, find out who's been feeding at the public trough at the expense of our kids. But after that, let's actually write the legislation that gets rid of it once and for all.
Yeah, on that note, I want to know, do you think this is actually going to happen, right? We see the executive order. We know that Thomas Massie has that one-line bill where it just says, hey, dismantle the Department of Education. Do we think it's going to happen the first time around? Because I feel like this is going to be a pretty big fight.
Right. Everything is going to be a really big fight. But I think part of what's going to propel us forward is the revelation about the financial corruption in all of these agencies. And I think the Department of Education is front and central as a slush fund for special interests. And I think, most Americans think the Department of Education, they must be funding education. Well, they're not. And that scandal will push a lot of Republicans to do the right thing. I even think some Democrats come across board and help them with that.
See, this is really important, I think, for everyone in the audience, because what you're describing is what I see as a strategy that's playing out, that's designed where the executive order comes out, but it's not just a press release. It prepares exposure, right, and puts everyone on notice. And it is sort of a press release in an important way to Congress, telling them this is the president's agenda for real. Yeah. You have to get rid of it. And then the exposure, like we're seeing with USAID right now, riles people up. It garners the momentum. So I hope when I see on X that Chris Rufo has entered the building, his job is probably to go in and start telling people what the hell's going on in there, right, to then build the momentum, because you have to give that public argument. And it's interesting to me. You've been at this for a while, and you see the public opinion go up and down. What's going on right now with Doge and USAID? I mean, it's remarkable to me. I mean, there's a little small cynical side of me that thinks, did you all not know that? Did you really think that this was? But a lot of people don't know it or aren't paying attention, and boy, they sure are now.
Well, obviously, with education specifically, parents started paying attention when they locked down schools. Mm-hmm. And then they looked at curriculum, and then they realized that the education system itself is kind of a torture process where you just regiment kids into obeying instead of actually igniting their minds and their spirits. That process is still going on. I think the American people are far more red-pilled than they were all those years that we've tried to reform education. But I also think you have, the head of Doge He's got a big X account.
He does.
And he seems to be a happy warrior, too. So I think there's a megaphone with all of these influencers, starting with Elon, starting with the podcast warriors, Rogan, et cetera. That's where the news comes from now. And all these years we've been fighting this fight, there was no way to get through the corporate media with that message.
Well, let's go into Doge itself, because so many people are ranting and raving, saying, oh, this was just created by an executive order. You can't just do this. But Elon wrote on X, he said, no, we renamed the U.S. Digital Services, which was created by Obama. And we just went and said, okay, it's going to be the U.S. Doge Services now. So give us a sense of what Doge actually is. Explain how this came to be about.
So I actually read the executive order, and Elon is exactly right. The lawyers that wrote this executive order understood what the limits of the law were, and they're basically repurposing something that Obama created under Obamacare, but frankly didn't use it effectively. It's about payment systems and data integrity, and this is why Elon has brought in these smart kids who actually know something about data and security, to find out where the corruption is. And it's endemic. Like, it's worse than even I imagined. And I'm a cynical libertarian, so I just assumed everyone was stealing everything, but it's worse than that. And they can go line by line, agency by agency, program by program, and they will discover, and they're already discovering with USAID, that it's all corruption. It's all corruption. So even if you were hoping that the Department of Education was sending money to schools to educate children, you're about to learn that it was a lie. That's powerful.
Yeah, and one of the most powerful things about it is that it's reawakened everyone's interest in a little thing called COVID that happened to the entire world a few years back. And you have some things to tell us about that ongoing series, the Coverup. If you haven't seen the previous episodes, you really should. It's incredible stuff. But this is detailing the government's effort to censor basically everything related to COVID-19.
Yeah, my guest on the most recent episode, Dr. Richard E. Bright, happens to have been Anthony Fauci's arch nemesis since going up back to 2001. And all of this influx of funding that gave Fauci so much power, the reason he's the highest paid man in the government, was because he became a bioterrorism czar, handpicked by Dick Cheney, financed by not only the Patriot Act, but other legislation. And the one problem they had was that the Department of Defense and other intelligence and defense agencies were explicitly prohibited from doing this kind of research. We had signed a treaty that said we're not going to do dangerous biodefense research. But there was no compliance office at USAID. There was no compliance office at NIAID, Anthony Fauci's perch. So they're basically laundering money to do dangerous research, sloppy security, one near miss after another until COVID-19 leaks from Wuhan. So there's a reason why Joe Biden backdated Anthony Fauci's pardon to 2014, because Fauci started breaking the law in 2015, specifically ignoring the Obama administration's pause on gain-of-function research, specifically on coronaviruses. Fauci and Francis Collins continued to do it anyway. And what I love about Dr. Ebright, he's lived this for the last 20 years. He used to be a hero with the New York Times. Now he's the enemy with the New York Times. He's saying the same thing he always did, but he has receipts. Every single failure and every single crime that Fauci has committed. And it's going to be interesting. Like, everybody's upset that Fauci's pardoned, but there's this guy, Rand Paul, who is the new chairman of the Homeland Security Committee with subpoena power. And Fauci has lost his Fifth Amendment right to not perjure himself. He has to speak. He has to show up, has to speak. He has two choices: finally tell the truth, or commit a new crime, which is not covered by Biden's pardon. It's going to be interesting. We're going to discover, I keep saying this, I want to know who Anthony Fauci's boss is. And I think, going back to Doge, we're going to discover some systemic corruption and fatal arrogance that arose out of this mad science experiment. And the only reason we need to know is it can't ever happen again.
I want to point out that Dr. Ebright is a Democrat, because we've talked about him here on the show before, but it is one of these things that is just, it's an interesting twist in the story where it's like, no, these wouldn't have been people that would have been like our friends back in the day. But now, because of all of the corruption that has come out, they're saying, no, I want to be a part of the truth. And that is one of the things that Dr. Ebright is doing. And I just want to commend him for doing this, because he has been so vocal and doing all these interviews.
This show next Thursday is a banger. Like you're gonna be shocked, but you're gonna be eating red pills by the bowl. But you need to know. We need to know what's happening.
All right. Well, let's go ahead. We have a clip of this. Let's go ahead and take a look at episode 4 of what will be the Coverup.
Through a series of oversight hearings, Senator Paul has exposed dangerous gain-of-function research funded by the NIH, and the lengths government bureaucrats went to cover it up.
Is there a deep state?
There you go. So give us a little preview of a little bit more of what these red pills that we're going to be just eating by the bowlful.
Your tax dollars have gone to insanely dangerous experiments. We recreated the Spanish flu, which had left the earth. We've weaponized bird flu, which is now driving up the cost of eggs beyond anything. And it was all done without any sunlight, without any cost-benefit analysis. And there have been near misses long before Wuhan that could have been planet-ending stuff. It doesn't get any worse than this. This is zombie apocalypse. Government arrogance at its most insane. And we gotta expose everybody has to appreciate what's happening so that they know who to hold accountable, and it never happens again.
Amen to that. This is not like one of those, political shows where like, or it's an expose. This is something that every single American needs to know, because it's not a conspiracy theory. You're laying out the facts with the number of experts that increasingly come to light every day. And to me, it's something where we got to get beyond the partisanship with this, because this is not a joke. Like you said, this is world-ending stuff, and it's still out there.
Yeah, and by the way, it's not like, it's fascinating to me that RFK Jr. is one of the first to expose Anthony Fauci. He can't get Bernie to vote for him, and the Democrats who used to support him are now against him. Jay Bhattacharya is not a partisan.
Right.
Marty Makary is not a partisan, the incoming head of the FDA. And obviously Richard Ebright, he's a former Democrat. He had a Biden sign in his yard. They're doing this because it's the right thing to do. It's not a partisan thing.
Last question for you. I just want your take right now on the administration and what is happening, just the pace of everything, and where you think this can actually go.
Yeah. So this Trump 2.0 is very different than Trump 1.0. They are locked and loaded. They are ready, and evidenced by the doge executive order. They know precisely what they're doing, and it's kind of shock and awe. Like, the Democrats seem completely unprepared for what they're doing. They don't know how to respond. And it, as I said earlier, it's important because Trump is also setting the agenda for when the House and Senate start doing their work. I wouldn't trust the House and Senate to do it themselves, with the exceptions of people like Rand Paul and Mike Lee. But it's an onslaught. And if, judging by the number of calls and outreach that citizens are doing to get the confirmations of RFK and Tulsi Gabbard and others through Kash Patel, they are going to fall in line, because there is a very focused public right now. And ultimately, that's the only thing that matters.